You face battles most never fought, pain, struggle, adversity. But here, we use that as fuel. This is the Battle Harder podcast, where we motivate, educate, and inspire warriors of life, veterans, survivors, leaders. We share stories and strategies to turn pain into progress. Here's your host, Coach Rob. Let's lock in and battle harder.
What's up, guys? My name is Coach Rob here, host of the Battle Harder podcast, where I hope to motivate, educate, and inspire you to become the best version of yourself. Today, we have a professional on the show that we're going to get into his journey and how he became who he is and what he does. He is a Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling author, and he's considered one of the leading voices on mindset-driven leadership. Can't wait to tell his story, and I hope this episode provides you some sort of value. So I'd like to welcome to the show Dr. Ryan Gottfredson.
Hey, thanks for having me on. And thank you for creating such an awesome platform to be able to dig into how we can battle harder. I love it.
Definitely. I'm happy you're here. I look forward to the conversation. So as I like to tell all my guests before we get into the meat, the good stuff, the trauma, all the things of the episode, just give us a little background of who you are and what do you do?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a leadership professor at Cal State Fullerton. If you haven't heard of Cal State Fullerton, we actually have the second largest business school in the United States. So I teach and do research on leadership there. And then I take what I learn into my research, and then I employ that to do consulting for organizations. So I help organizations all over the world to develop and elevate their leaders so that they can elevate their organizations and their people. And then, as you had mentioned, I've written a few books. I've got a new book coming out called Becoming Better, and happy to talk about all of this as we continue our conversation.
That's awesome. And even though I consider myself a Floridian now, I was born and raised in California. I lived in California for 21 years. And I like to call Florida the poor man's California because I can afford to live here and not in California. So Californians are close to my heart. So let's get started as far as what led you to get into this area of expertise. Like, how did you get into leadership, and what kind of happened in your life or guided you to go down to, like, I would say what I'm doing, the personal development arena?
Yeah, well, it all started, I'm going to give you kind of two pivotal moments. It all started in high school, actually. So in high school, I took a class that I'm not sure is offered in very many high schools. The class was sports psychology. And I loved the class. And I got to read some great books by some famous basketball coaches. I played basketball growing up. So I read books by Mike Krzyzewski, Pat Riley, and Rick Majerus. And I remember thinking as a senior in high school, man, if I could write books like this for a career, that would be awesome. That would be the ideal career. But I didn't know how to make that happen. Fast forward a little bit, I met a Harvard Business School professor, and I asked him, well, what do you teach? And he said, organizational behavior. And I said, well, what's that? And how he described it, the thought that popped in my mind was, this is sports psychology, but for business. I thought, man, that's for me. So I went on and I got my PhD at Indiana University, and I did my dissertation on leadership. And one of the things that I learned through doing my dissertation was the vast majority of research primarily focuses on what do leaders need to do to operate better at a higher level. And I think that's a good question. What do leaders need to do? And it's led to some good answers. We have some really good answers to that question. But at the same time, that question felt short-sighted to me, because I don't know about you, Rob, but I feel like leadership is not just about doing certain things. It's about being a certain type of person.
Right.
And so when I took the job at Cal State Fullerton, that became my purpose. How do we explain what we need to be an effective leader? And that's what led me to focusing on things like mindsets, now vertical development. My new book coming out is all about being somebody that others want to follow.
So Give us a brief for someone that may not know what organizational behavior is, and I like how you attributed that to sports psychology. And that would be awesome if more schools would offer that. For most of what my knowledge is, you can only get sports psychology in college. But what is a brief or a dumbed down description of organizational leadership?
Yeah, organizational behavior is really just the study of people in organizations. So if you think about in an organization, what's an organization's most valuable resource? It's its people. So organizational behavior is all about the people, and we could study that in a variety of ways, right? We could study that in terms of how employees feel. What is their employee engagement level? We could study it from a cultural perspective. We could, what is the culture of an organization and how does that impact an employee? We could study employee performance or leader performance or just leaders in general. So that's organizational behavior. That's the space in which if it deals with people in organizations, then it's organizational behavior.
So as far as leadership, and I think, obviously a company or a brand or organization can only be as successful as how well the leader operates and works. And I think that takes some very demanding and strong traits. What would you say is the either top 3 or top 5 qualities that a good leader should have in order to have a successful organization?
Yeah, well, I think you make such a great point. The sophistication of the leaders sets the ceiling for the groups and the organizations that they lead. And so what that means is if we want to raise and elevate our groups or elevate our organizations, we've got to elevate ourselves as leaders. And in particular, and this is kind of an ambiguous word, but we've got to elevate our sophistication. What is cognitively and emotionally sophisticated? And so what I've learned is that the best leaders, they operate more out of a purpose to create value than for some sort of benefit for themselves. Right? When you think about any great superhero movie, what makes them a superhero? It's because they have this ability to put their own well-being on the back burner to be able to create value for others. And at the end of the day, that's what makes great leaders, and leaders people others want to follow.
I like that, especially like I'm a huge nerd, giant big kid. I love all the Marvel, DC, Star Wars movies. And I like that character trait of going above and beyond for your community and your company and going above and beyond for yourself. And I think even in a relationship as a husband, a father, or a male role model, or even a leader, it's always what can you give to your community? What can you give to your company? What can you give to the other person? It's not about yourself. And those leaders that lead from the front, as you will, and do that, and not the whole iron fist, do as I say, not as I do. I think these are where we see the most successful case studies in companies and the values of an organization and work-life balance and areas where people want to gravitate towards their leaders and perform better. So what can you speak on or kind of expand on as far as the character traits of employees that want to work for the kind of leader, and like what type of leader as far as wanting to perform well for the place that they work at?
Yeah. So one of the things that I'll commonly say to the executives that I work with is it's really important for them to become gardener-minded leaders. So Rob, are you a gardener at all?
No, not really. I live in a townhouse, so there's really no gardening involved at the moment.
Yeah. So I'm not much of a gardener either, but here's what I feel like I know about gardening is a gardener can't force a seed to sprout, a plant to grow, or a tree to bear fruit. Right? They can't force that to occur. But here's the second thing. If they create the right conditions, then the seed will sprout, the plant will grow, and the tree will bear fruit. And here's the third thing. The better the conditions, the greater the growth and the greater the yield. And so what I've learned is that the best leaders are gardener-minded leaders. They are intensely focused on creating the right environment for their people to grow and to thrive. And if a leader can focus on and cultivate that environment, then naturally the people will grow and thrive, and they'll want to follow these types of leaders. Now, the problem is, and here's what the research has found, only 8% of leaders are what we would classify as these gardener-minded leaders. 85% of leaders are going to be what I call, they're not root-focused, they're fruit-focused. So 85% of leaders are doing less gardening, and they're doing more like, if you think of, if we've got a fruit tree, you can almost picture them like trying to pull the tree as a method of trying to get it to grow. But if I pull the tree, it's not really going to speed up the process. The only way of improving the fruit is by cultivating the roots. And it's just, what we find is that 85% of leaders are much more focused on the fruit than they are the roots. And that's innately problematic.
And we know, I like that analogy a lot, because when you're planting roots, the roots are that solid foundation that holds everything together. And without that solid foundation, you're bound to failure. So as far as on the mindset part of leadership, what have you seen, or what traits do you have to teach leaders to be more of a gardener and have that gardener mindset?
Yeah, well, one is what I think another way of asking that same question is, what are aspects of a leader that cause them to be more self-protective as opposed to value creating, right? So if a leader is focused on the fruits, well, why? Why are they so focused on the fruits? It's generally because they've got some sort of self-interest. Oftentimes they want to stand out, they want to advance, they want to get ahead, they want to get recognized, right? And so that's how most leaders are innately wired. They have some wiring that is self-protective as opposed to value creation. Well, why is it that some leaders are more wired for self-protection? Well, one of the things that I've learned, and there's not a lot of people out there talking about this, one of the things that I've learned is that generally if somebody is self-protective, they're more wired to stand out, advance, get ahead, be recognized. Well, the reason why they're wired in that way is because they have some sort of fears or insecurities. And oftentimes those fears and insecurities are rooted in some form of past trauma.
Right.
So let me give you an example of this. I was working with a CEO, and he's been able to grow what looks like on the outside is a rather successful business. Financially, they are successful. But if you go into the organization, talk to his executive team or other employees, they would say that they're feeling rather burned out. That the only reason that they're working at this organization is because the CEO pays them way more than they can make working with another organization. And so I was brought in to try to help the CEO to be less of a micromanager, become more of a value creating leader. And as I started to meet with this CEO, we started to just dive into, why are you self-protective? Why are you so much more focused on results, accolades, success than you are on cultivating the right environment for your people? And as we got into this, and I didn't really ask for this, but he voluntarily kind of stepped forward and said, look, I think that the reason why I am so driven to make sure that this company is financially successful is because this is the only way I know how to get recognized. I said, wow, tell me more. Where does this come from? And he said, well, what you've got to understand is, when I was a kid, my dad left us. I wasn't around my dad at all. And my mom was extremely busy and really wasn't around. And I honestly, I never got, even if I did some amazing things. He's like, I was all state in athletics in high school, but I never got any recognition from my mom for the things that I accomplished. And so he said, in business, the reason why I chase rewards is because that's the only way I know how I could be recognized and feel of worth.
So that's pretty cool, because, I mean, it sucks, but it's cool to hear, because it sounds like trauma, everybody has some form of trauma is what I'm finding out, no matter how small or it could be big, whatever scale. We all have gone through something. But if you don't deal with that trauma and you just kind of push it away and save it for later, it's going to rear its ugly head in some way, whether that's in your leadership, whether that's in your relationship, whether that's in your parenting. And that's, I guess, kind of what I'm trying to talk about and open up the floor to. I want people to be able to deal with their trauma head on and realize that it doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you broken. It doesn't make you a bad person. It's just the way of life, and we have to find the ways to overcome it. So I think that's very valuable in what you're saying about how trauma, how we grow up in society, how our parents raise us, can really speak to what kind of leader we're going to become and how we're going to lead in an organization or a company. And that's kind of scary that people would stay just because the money's good. You know what I'm saying? Like, I believe in, being happy regardless of how much money we're making. And so were you finding when you were working with this company, did any of the employees like speak out, or were they afraid of the leader of the management team, or how did that go?
Yeah, definitely they kind of operated out of a place of fear of that CEO coming down hard on them. So, which is definitely the way you don't want to lead, right? So this is not a good example. But you brought up, Rob, some really great points. Research has found is that at least 70% of adults, have experienced trauma to the degree that has caused their bodies to become more wired for self-protection. So all of us have some self-protective tendencies within us. And those self-protective tendencies ultimately hold us back from being the value creator that we want to be, from being the hero, to kind of go back to our hero analogy, from being the hero we all want to be. I've heard it phrased this way, and I like this phrasing. I've heard it phrased, the wiring that we developed to survive our childhood is not the same wiring that is needed to be successful as a leader, as an adult, as a parent, as a spouse, as a manager, whatever it might be. If we want to excel in adulthood, we've actually got to upgrade our internal wiring. And what that generally means at a very foundational level is actually we've got to do the work of healing ourselves. Definitely. And I hope you can sense as we check in on the CEO as an example, is that ultimately, if he's going to improve as a leader, he's got to heal himself from his past wounds. And that's the key to that. And that's what I talk about in my book, Becoming Better. If we want to become better at a foundational level, it really is about healing our minds, our bodies, and our hearts.
So with the people you've coached and things you've experienced, why do you think people are so resistant to change?
Well, it is generally connected to this continuum that we keep bringing up. It's the continuum between self-protection and value creation. The reason why people are resistant to change, and resistance is a signal of self-protection, right? We resist it because that invitation to change feels uncomfortable, unsafe, and may put us in a position where we don't belong. And so the invitations to change innately feel wrong or bad to us because they put ourselves in a situation that feels dangerous to us, unsafe, uncomfortable, and like we won't belong. And it's really only until we develop a willingness to step into discomfort that we could ultimately do this healing and becoming better work that we're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. I say a lot of the same things, it seems like, on every podcast with every guest. But the common theme, one, is you have to be comfortable in being uncomfortable. I've found and learned from multiple people and from my own life and the things I've struggled with, that's where the progress lies. It doesn't lie in the protection. It lies in the opening yourself up to feel these emotions and accept that, something bad happened, but you're you're here, you're alive, you're resilient. So with that being said, I don't know how much you're allowed to speak on, but can you explain what Gallup was and kind of what happened? And because this is kind of like how you became who you are now, correct? Like, let's get into that story a little bit, please.
Yeah. Happy to dive into this. Let me frame up this story and just kind of part of my journey is at this time in my life, I was at Cal State Fullerton for 2 years and I was feeling kind of stuck. I was just like, oh man, I don't know if I'm going to love teaching the same classes over and over again for the next 30 plus years. And so I'm thinking, man, is this something that I really want to do? And I've always had the niche to do some consulting work. So what I did is I took a leave of absence from Cal State Fullerton and I took a job as a consultant at Gallup. Gallup does a lot of HR, organizational behavior consulting for organizations. They primarily focus on helping organizations improve their culture through a focus on engagement. So I took the job at Gallup, and at the end of the day, 10 months into this, I'm kind of complaining to my manager because I felt like I had kind of been pigeonholed in a position that was smaller than what I felt like I signed up for. So I was on the phone complaining to my manager, and my manager is kind of just had enough of me complaining. So she kind of stops the conversation. She says, Ryan, stop right there. I was like, okay. And she said, look, this clearly doesn't seem to be working out. I'm going to let you go.
Wow.
And I am just like, oh my goodness, I just got fired. I never thought I would be fired. And this was a huge wake up call for me. And here's part of the reason why is because I knew at that time I had the knowledge and skills to be successful. But at the same time, I wasn't. I got fired. And so I had to kind of wrestle with this. Why is it that I got fired? And at that time, I decided to come back to Cal State Fullerton, and I started to dive into research on mindsets. And as I started to learn more and more about mindsets, I started to learn more and more that while I had the knowledge and skills to be successful, I didn't have the mindsets to be successul. And that was a huge wake-up call. And so that further led me to be more motivated to kind of dive in and really do what based upon what I've seen is the deepest and most comprehensive dive on mindsets that I've seen put together. And that's what culminated in my first book, Success Mindsets. And it features just my journey of awakening to my mindsets, learning that I didn't have very good mindsets, and then doing the work of elevating my mindsets. And that was, so that firing moment, I feel like was a huge inflection point for my life and set me on a completely different trajectory than what I was before. And the reason why I was able to capitalize on that is because simultaneously I was working on developing my mindsets. And so one of the lessons that I take from that and how I focus on that with the leaders and the organizations that I work with is if we want to elevate and not just in an incremental way, but in a transformational way, we've got to connect to our mindsets and awaken to their quality and then do the work of elevating our mindsets.
So when you decided to go, like, I guess on this journey to self-awareness on yourself, what initial mindsets helped you or started to reframe your mind, so to speak? Like, was it journaling? Did you practice gratitude? Like, what's some of the practical applications that you did that worked for you that kind of started to get you in the place where you said, hey, this is where I need to be?
Yeah, great question. So the first step when doing mindset work is always self-awareness. And so it started with me awakening to the quality of my mindsets. Now, what I've learned in terms of the academic research that I've done is that there's 4 different sets of mindsets that have been researched over the last 40 years. And they are, I'll just kind of rattle them off. They're fixed and growth. So the fixed mindset is more self-protective. The growth mindset is more value creating. So we got fixed and growth, closed and open, prevention and promotion, and inward and outward. And in fact, if you want to learn more about these mindset sets and even take a mindset assessment to gauge the quality of your mindsets, you could go to my website at ryangottfredson.com, and there's a free mindset assessment that's there. So I didn't have that mindset assessment to gauge my mindsets. But as I started to learn about each of these different sets, I started to learn that I was more self-protective on all 4 of these different sets of mindsets. And so then I dug into doing research. Well, how do I go about shifting my mindsets? And here's the value of this framework is if we can understand this framework and if we can identify certain mindsets that we struggle with, then that becomes a place for us to focus. So let me give you an example. I very much at the time had a prevention mindset. That meant I was more focused on avoiding problems than I was on fulfilling a purpose or reaching goals. And ultimately, that was a mindset that I think is what led me to get fired at Gallup, and one that I needed to change if I wanted to create the life of my dreams. So that became.
So sorry. So thinking about what you just said, does it make sense, or does it seem like if you're, I'll use a car analogy, a fuel gauge, right? And you either want to be, I would say, in the middle or all the way to the left with the growth mindset and the outward mindset versus the right on empty with, it seems like the right side is a little more negative than the left side. Am I correct on that, or? Yeah,
the self-protective mindsets, I'm not going to inherently call them negative, but they oftentimes have a negative impact on our long-term success.
Right.
They're self-protective. They help us out in the moment, but they ultimately hold us back in the long term.
Yeah, I definitely know from my own experience with trying to overcome my mental health issues and everything as a veteran and police officer. I definitely had to have that growth mindset and get out of that mode of protection. And I speak about that a lot, especially when it comes to police officers, first responders, and veterans. We stack trauma on trauma on trauma on trauma, and then we never deal with it because we're always in that self-protective mode, right? But what happens is there's no emotional regulation. So when we get off shift or we go home, before we step through that door or that threshold, we don't turn it off. So what happens? Maybe the wife didn't cook dinner because she was dealing with our kids, or she had a bad day. And instead of being empathetic to that, we turn it into, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. And it's not that we're mad at our significant other or the partner in our life. We just don't know how to deal with that trauma. So does emotional regulation at all play into when you're dealing with businesses and corporations and leaders?
Oh, spot on. So let me frame it up this way. One of the things that I've learned is that we have 2 different sides of ourselves. And one side of ourselves is what I call our doing side. Think about that as like on a horizontal dimension. Our doing side is our level of talent, knowledge, skills, and abilities. Right? For example, Rob, have you ever had a boss or a leader who's been incredibly knowledgeable and skillful, but has been a micromanager?
Yeah, I tend to feel like it either goes, you have the person that will give their shirt off their back to help you, be successful at the risk of getting in trouble with upper management, or you have the person that knows everything, but like you said, they're on your butt all day. You need to do this, you need to do that. Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? I've never found like a middle of the road manager, especially in my time in the military. It's kind of either or.
Interesting. Yeah. So what this is saying is, right, we've got one side, it's our doing side. That's our level of talent, knowledge, skills, and abilities. And we could have somebody who's really far out on the doing side, but that doesn't necessarily make them a great person or a great leader. And if we want to get into that, we really need to understand the second side of ourselves, which is our being side. And think about our being side as being more on a vertical dimension. And our being side is the quality and sophistication of our internal operating system. Or to use your terminology, Rob, it's our emotional regulation abilities. And on our being side, we can identify our being side altitude by investigating to what degree is our body and our mindsets wired for value creation as opposed to self-protection. And so there's this continuum on this vertical side, and our when we connect into our emotional regulation abilities, that helps us to gauge our altitude along our being side. So people who have a tendency to be more reactive, that's a signal that they're lower on their being side. People who are more cognitively and emotionally in control, particularly in stressful or performance-based situations, well, that's going to be a really strong indication that they're higher on their being side.
So when I love this. This is very interesting, and you're the first guest I've had on from a more leadership standpoint. So it's cool to learn more about this. When it comes to the people you deal with that maybe have a jacked up value system, or they don't have, like, my core beliefs stem exactly from the military, which is honor, courage, commitment. And I try to live by that belief system. How, because, you're a specialist in leadership, and, you're very knowledgeable about mindset, but how do you break them down to change that without, if you don't want to, share your proprietary stuff, but what is your skill set, or what do you do to break down that leader? Because I'm sure you run into some leaders or corporations where they're very resistant to you coming in and trying to fix things or give them a different perspective.
Yeah, for sure. So everything that I focus on in the development work that I do is all focused on this being side. How can we help people upgrade their internal operating system? So with every organization and every leader, I've got to find a different hook that is going to hook them in particular. And everybody's a little bit different. But I found that one of the best hooks is to focus on mindsets. And we could teach people about mindsets. We could give them a self-assessment. And all of these things just help get our foot in the door for them to start the process of doing a deeper level of introspection about themselves, helping them to get more familiar with the wiring of their internal operating system. So mindsets is oftentimes the hook that I use, and I found it to be quite successful. That's not going to be the hook for everybody. But generally, what we find is that ultimately what needs to happen is an individual, in order for them to have this kind of inflection point moment, is they've got to have what is called a heat experience. Now, a heat experience is any sort of experience that we have that causes us or invites us to do that deeper level of introspection. Now, these heat experiences, now we've all gone through heat experiences. Everybody's gone through heat experiences, but not everybody capitalizes on the heat experience. So in order for us to capitalize on the heat experience, we've got to have the heat experience, and we've got to turn inward. And we've got to start to question kind of our own innate perspectives and our own values. And so as a coach, it's really helpful to have a coach in this process, because a coach can help us to do that. Now, let me just mention on heat experiences, there's kind of two different types of heat experiences. One of those heat experiences is what I call external heat experiences. This is when, like for me, I got fired. That was an external heat experience. If we get in a car accident, that could be a heat experience. If if I'm serving in the military and I have this really traumatic situation, that can be a heat experience. So those are all external heat experiences, and we can leverage those for our own growth and development. But there's also what I call internal heat experiences. This is where we use, like, a coach or a consultant or a guide, maybe that's a book that we read, that causes us, without having to go through something external to us, it's just a context in which we, on our own, selectively choose to dive inward. But either way, whether it's external or internal, these heat experiences are a necessary part of us elevating along our being side.
I love that. And for the people listening, I want you to really hear this. So if you have to, go back to where he starts talking about heat experiences and replay it if you have to a couple times. We have to be able to work from the inside out most of the time, not the outside in, and be able to change things, right? And external factors that cause us trauma, they suck. But internally, at the end of the day, I think I've said this before with other experts, even neuroscientists, our brain is essentially a supercomputer, and we can rewire that, we can reprogram that, we can rebuild that to what we want it to be. So you have to get those limiting beliefs out of your head and out of your system in order to be successful. You can't be stuck in that insanity loop of negativity, bad thoughts. So, oh man, I had a question. I had a really good question, but then I forgot. As far as okay, that's my question. As far as and I don't know, because for me, in my coaching, my 3 pillars, fitness is first, because I use fitness to look at their overall health, nutrition, how they act, how they look, how they feel.
Yep.
And if they're not doing some form of activity, by me getting them on a path of being active and starting to change how they think about food and how they eat, that starts to build the resilience. And then once they start to build that resilience, I can go in there with the mindset shifts and say, okay, think about things this way, use journaling, use gratitude, and then the discipline, because at the end of the day, I don't want everybody to work with Coach Rob forever. I try to work myself out of a job, so to speak. Have you seen anything in the realms of when you're dealing with these leaders as far as their overall health, how they look, how they present themselves in relation to how the people that work under them feel about them?
For sure. So I'm going to put some language around what I feel like you just said. So if we want to elevate along our being side, I think there's 3 different systems we need to focus on in our connected to our body. We need to focus on our physical body. We need to focus on our mind, and we need to focus on our heart. And I think all of those are almost a near essential things to focus on for us to elevate along our being side. So our body, I think it is worth talking about our fitness and our nutrition. I'm also going to add to that things like meditation. Is a thing that will help us better connect with our body. Also, I've been exposed to some recent research around cold plunges. Mm-hmm. Cold plunges are also a way for us to connect to our body and help us to refine our body's nervous system.
What about breath work?
Yeah, breath work and meditation to me follow on under that same umbrella. Yeah, so
makes sense.
Yeah, so those are some examples. I don't know. Would you add any others?
No, I mean, cold plunging. The thing about cold plunging is people are like taking it to the extreme. I think it is good. I think anytime that, once again, you can be comfortable being uncomfortable, whether that's a hard workout or fasting. I guess I would add fasting. I had a lot of success with intermittent fasting, but as I've learned, I teach people that it's more about a spiritual or emotional than more the diet, because you're going without something. And, you know, we've been conditioned so long that, eat 3 meals a day or snack or whatever. So when you remove that, that puts you in that flight or fight mode where you're like, do I really want to eat something, or can I mentally sustain from that? So I think fasting is important. Taking cold showers, cold plunges, anything that's out of the realm of making you comfortable. And that's where, for me, I think fitness is ultimately very important, because if you lift weights and you can do that one last rep, or you're doing some sort of cardio and you run that extra couple minutes or do that last push up, that starts to build that mental toughness, that mental resilience. And the mentally stronger we are, the more apt we are to be able to deal with the problems that come in our path. I guess my last question before I get into the final question and I close off the show, and I'll let you share whatever else you'd like to. What have you found? Because I'm assuming when you go into a corporation, you deal with a leader, you kind of give them a total holistic approach as far as you look at everything, or as much as you possibly can look at. How does family relationships go into whether they're an effective leader or not?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never been asked that question before. So I think it always, of course, depends on the relationship. I think I don't think it's necessary, given my experience, for somebody to be in a great relationship to be a great leader. I think it's helpful. When leaders are in better relationships, I think it allows them to feel more secure in their body, which then allows them to show up better in the places where they lead. But as you say this, like here's another, I'm going to kind of go in a different direction, because here's oftentimes what I've found is when I'm helping leaders elevate along their being side, and then we'll do that being side work. And then after, let's say it's 3 months or 6 months down the road, I'll come back to them and say, how has this benefited you? And what is so fascinating to me is that almost every time I ask somebody that question, how has this benefited you? And again, I'm working with them in an employment context. How they answer the question is they first start by talking about a change in their family or in their relationships. And I've always kind of wondered why. Why is that? Well, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I find it incredibly meaningful. But as I've kind of thought about why that is, what the answer that comes to me is, well, that's the place, the family is maybe the place where they feel the safest to try out a new version of themselves. And so they try it out with their family, they see an impact. Now they're going to be more apt to try it out in their employment context. But I just have always found that so interesting, that where the positive impact of the being side work first shows up seems to be always with one's family or relationships.
And I think that's kind of important to highlight, because if you're, going through a divorce or a breakup, or your kids are sick or terminally ill, or a family member dies, that's obviously going to affect, if we don't have, like I said, once again, the emotional regulation, how we lead at a workplace or a company or a corporation. Because once again, just like you have to turn off the trauma or check yourself before you go in your house, you have to do the same thing before you go to work. You can't you have to be like I guess like a character, you have to be the hero at the workplace and then the Clark Kent at the household, right?
Yep.
And I bring this up because when I was in the military, and a lot of veterans have talked about this, and even I think with police officers that happens too, you get a leader who maybe he doesn't like his wife, or he's going through a divorce, and instead of dealing with it and going home and going to therapy or doing whatever to fix that, he takes it out on his employees, and he's like, well, I don't want to go home because my wife hates me, so we're going to work extra 4 hours today, and it's that whole, like you said, micromanagement, and I don't care, I outrank you, I have more power than you, so do what I say, bow to me, and your life's going to suck. And I think that's a horrible thing, no matter what kind of leader you are, to put on your employees. And obviously that's going to make people not like you and not want to work for you and not do what you say. So I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit.
No, you're spot on. Yeah, when leaders operate in that way, and hopefully you can now see and understand this more clearly, is that when leaders and people operate in that way, it's a sign or signal of their being side altitude, right? If we've got issues with relationships in our life, that's something that we could actually use as a mirror to investigate our being side deficiencies. And so, yeah, and at the end of the day, I think the message, and I hope the message that is kind of coming through in our conversation, is that at the end of the day, if we want to become better people, better spouses, better leaders, better employees, better coaches, if we want to become better, we've got to awaken to, focus on, and elevate our being side.
I love that. I love the term elevate. Like, that's, I think, a very important term in this episode. So before I close out the show, I always like to ask my guests, what is your definition of turning pain into progress?
Well, I'll leverage how we've talked about those heat experiences, right? Pain, I think, can be a heat experience. And the key to turning that into progress is if we use those heat experiences as an opportunity to dive deeper inward. Because here's what I've learned. The deeper we go inward, the higher we can go on our being side.
I love that. You're still teaching, correct?
Correct. Yep.
So what did you do, or what do you do for your mindset that, because you said you didn't know if you wanted to teach for 30 years, what are you currently doing to make teaching fun for you, or for you to continue to enjoy it?
Yeah. So here's one of the things that I've found, both for myself as well as working with other leaders or employees that are feeling burned out. Burnout generally has very little to do with the number of hours that we work, or even how much effort we put in at work. Burnout has so much more to do with our disconnection from a purpose. And I think ultimately that's why I was feeling stuck, is I was feeling that was a sign that I was disconnected from a purpose. So now I feel like I have a lot more energy around my teaching, because now I see my role as a professor as I have a purpose. And my purpose is to help my students to become better versions of themselves, to help them to elevate their lives, their work, and their leadership. And if I can have that impact, man, that just that fuels me. So no matter how hard I work, no matter how long I work, if I'm fueled by a purpose, it feels fun and it doesn't feel like a job. And that's where I feel like I've been able to get to, fortunately.
And I love that. And so for everybody listening, if you find your purpose, whatever it is, and sometimes we don't find our purpose till later in life, and to hit exactly on what Ryan was saying, when I was a police officer at the Veterans Affairs Hospital, everybody there was miserable. Everybody that worked there was miserable. My coworkers, the people I worked around, everybody was just negative. And when you see that every day for 6 years, it really starts to play on you. Then on top of that, dealing with veterans, when I first took the job as a police officer there, I was like, I want to help the vets. I'm here for the vets. It's my community. But as time went on, I dealt with the same vets that were always on drugs, or always drunk, or always having mental health issues. I was always taking the same veterans to jail. I was always fighting hands-on with the same veterans. And once again, that really negative played on me. It wasn't because I was working 12-hour shifts during nighttime, or I had so many reports during the day. No, it was the attitude of my coworkers. It was the community that I was in. It was the totality of the circumstances that made me leave. So, if you're having burnout, take some time to we have to take assessments of our life every so often, right? You have to take a step back, whether it's taking a day off or talking to the spouse or the people you love, and really analyzing what you're going through, analyzing why you feel the way you do. What does your work-life balance look like? What does your family life balance look like? And if you're not happy, not necessarily just go out and quit and say, I'm not doing this anymore, but find your purpose, find your passion. And then when you find your purpose and you find your passion, figure out. So one thing I like to teach, and maybe Ryan, you can agree with this or not, or give your ideas. I feel like everything in life can be reverse engineered, right? So what I do is, say I want to make $10,000 a month. Okay. So I write that down on a sheet of paper and I say, okay, I want to make $10,000 a month. But then I say, how am I going to do this? I need X amount of clients a month. I need to sell X amount of merchandise a month. I need to have this sponsor for the podcast. And as you write stuff down and break it down line by line, item by item, you can start to build out this plan of how you're going to actually get to where you want and what you want to do. So as far as like reverse engineering with you dealing with companies or even in your own life, have you seen anything like that at all?
Well, I guess what I've learned is that if we're ever going to make progress, we've got to have a destination that we're shooting towards. And I think that destination, and we've got to have that why, that purpose for getting there. And then there's a whole bunch, those are the necessary elements. Then, the tools or tactics for making progress, I think, can differ. And I think what you've given as reverse engineering is one tool, one tactic that could really help us to get there. But in my mind, the two keys are destination and the why for getting there.
Right. So one thing that I teach, in the military taught me this, is SMART goals. So it has to be specific, You have to have exactly intent with what you want. It has to be measurable. It has to be something that you can actually see in a realistic time frame. It has to be attainable. So when we're goal setting, we don't say, I want to lose 100 pounds in 10 days. You have to be very realistic. And then the T, you have to have that target to get to exactly what you want. Anything, Ryan, where can they find you at? And any final thoughts?
No, this has been great. Where people can find me, go to my website, ryangottfredson.com. Got some free self-assessments, as we talked about. Also learn more about my new book, Becoming Better. In fact, I'll throw this out there. I guess if anybody wants to connect with me, either via email or social media, send me a message. I'd be happy to walk through your mindset assessment results one-on-one, jump on a call with you. So if anybody wants to take me up on that, great. But I hope at the end of the day, I just feel like the beautiful core of the message that we've been talking about has been, ultimately, if we want to become better, it's really about healing our minds, our bodies, and our hearts. And I hope we've given some ideas and even some inspiration to help you get there and become more of the person that you want to become.
I like that. And, guys, if you know me, it's mindset over everything. So, guys, with that being said, this was my host, Dr. Ryan Gottfredson. I thank you for being on the Battle Harder podcast. I've been Coach Rob, and remember, subscribe to the channel. All Dr. Ryan's links will be in the show notes if you want to connect to him. I suggest any guest I have on that gives you a free mindset tool or mindset evaluation, do it. Give it a shot. And guys, just remember, always be fit for battle. Thank you.
You've just heard another battle-tested conversation. Now it's time to take action. If this episode lit a fire in you, subscribe on Spotify, Apple, iHeart, or YouTube, so you never miss a moment that could change your life. Want to go deeper? Connect with Coach Rob at BattleFittedBrand.com for coaching, gear, and tools to help you turn your pain into progress. Remember, life will test you, but you're built to battle harder. Until next time, stay locked in, stay ready, and keep showing up.